suggesting that the lifting of sanctions are going to sort the situation out tomorrow, and indeed nobody is suggesting that. But to put forward as a reason for not doing something the fact that we're not going to solve all of the problems, we wouldn't really get very far if we were to adopt that type of mentality. And we put forward this motion as a basic, simple, humanitarian proposition. And to be honest, much of the discussion that has been before us today has been misinformed and inaccurate. And, you know, in 1999, when UNICEF released a report that showed a doubling of mortality rates for children under 5 in Iraq as a result of the sanctions, the US continued to valiantly support that cause of action, which was a crime against humanity as far as I'm concerned. But there's a sad irony in your contribution and that of Fianna Fáil, who support the UN-led Geneva Plan, but don't support the UN commissioned research into this area, which shows the exact opposite of many of the statements that have been boldly placed before the House tonight. You tell us there are no sanctions on food, medicines and most other civilian goods. The EU sanctions are not a barrier to the delivery of aid or a cause of civilian suffering. Ireland has consistently supported sanctions targeted at the Assad regime and its supporters. But none of that is a reality. The UN report commissioned last year points out very clearly that absolutely, while the report recognises the differing ways both the US and EU sanctions framework makes specific allowances to permit activities in the context of humanitarian work, however, it further finds that the practical application of navigating these permissions act as an impediment to the delivery of humanitarian aid. And the 40-page report, leaked report, incidentally, gives many examples of that. We know, for example, that sanctions on Syrian banks have made the transfer of funds into the country nearly impossible. Even when it's legal, the chilling factor of threat of violation fees makes a lot of transactions difficult, meaning that aid workers for so on can't get paid. In actual fact, it's been stated by the Centre for Syrian Studies at the University of St Andrews tell us that the sanctions have actually empowered the regime, because aid is now an essential part of the Syrian economy, and sanctions give regime cronies in Syria the ability to monopolise access to goods. It makes everyone reliant on the government. This was the case in Iraq with the food for oil system. And we had the report leaked by The Guardian last year that says, despite your sanctions targeted at the Assad regime, $18 million was given to Assad companies and family members' companies last year despite the sanctions. We know in 2012, for example, through access to the Assad family emails, that the sanctions didn't stop him buying the Steve Jobs biography or a Harry Potter movie over the internet, or it didn't stop his wife buying Ming vases from Harrods or diamonds from Paris. So I can guarantee you the facts prove other than what you've said. Sanctions are hurting the people on the ground, and they are not targeting the regime whose position, to be honest with you, has actually become strengthened out of that scenario. And I think there's a cruel irony that those who are peddling that myth about sanctions were the very ones who argued and supported the lifting of the arms embargo at the same time in rebel-held areas, essentially allowing the areas to be awash with weaponry, which carried on the activities and the war way beyond what would have happened otherwise by every single foreign power and almost individual feasting on that area. And when we went to the primarily Christian village of Malula, we were given evidence of that very clearly, where the people in the village told us previously it was a village that was 2/3 Christian, 1/3 Muslim. And on the day when Barack Obama announced that they were going to take on Syria and bomb Syria, that gave the green light to the rebel forces surrounding that village. And they had a chilling video recording of the suicide bomber who set off a bomb at the entrance to that village, which led to an attack and a takeover of that village. And the hundreds of families who lived there were cleared out of it. Now hundreds of them are beginning to come back and trying to rebuild their lives. Those people want the resources to do that. And the inability to rebuild some of that area is being stopped because of sanctions, because of the huge infrastructural demands that are required in that area. And I mean, I think there was a very sad irony for us in that situation when we had a meeting with the priest in the parish centre there, when he recognised very clearly that in 2011 many people in Syria were enthused by the Arab Spring. They saw an opportunity to maybe deal with the Assad regime after many years, and they decided to have a go at it. But he said, you know, people now realise they had security, they had a social life, they had an economic life, and in many ways, while they hated Assad, they say, should we make a war for this? What have we been left with now? And we met many people who are trying to rebuild their lives. And quite simply, some of the points here are not true. Deputy O'Loughlin talked about Homs. Homs was supposed to be the cradle of the revolution against Assad. Well, we were in Homs, and it is being rebuilt. And as Deputy Wallace said, the school in Krema al-Maksoumi, utterly tragic. Almost 2,000 children in those two schools, multicultural, which stayed open all during the war, children aged 6 to 12, 2 suicide bombs, 4 children in the one family. One family's, all their whole children were wiped out in those 2 bombs. They have a shrine in the school where they have the uniform of one of the little girls who was killed with the blood on it. And they've used the devastation from the bombing to make them into nice things, into pictures, into paintings, to teach people that out of evil and the response to evil should be love and assistance, that out of destruction should come construction. And that message was told to us on many times over. And I'm glad you made the points about the children in Fua and Kafraya, because we did meet some of their friends, and that was probably one of the most harrowing experiences that we had. When the terrorists closed off those 2 towns, families were divided. Some of them haven't seen their family members for years. They were famous for olive trees. They cut the olive trees now to burn wood. They were starving and hungry, and when a deal was eventually negotiated to get them out, a suicide bomber enticed children after 3 days of waiting with crisps and sweets to come to the car which the bomb was set off. And we met family members whereby one woman was a friend of a woman who had 3 children who were taken or injured, were taken presumably to Turkey. She got one of those children back because a doctor in Turkey found her, but she's had no word of the other 2 children. So we have taken up your offer, and we've begun a process to try and get as much information as we possibly can. And the fact that we would articulate for them here is not in any way to be ignorant for all of the other missing and displaced people in other areas, but these were the ones that we met, and we kind of gave them a pledge that we would do what we could, because the pain and the trauma on those people's faces was very hard to forget. One woman had lost 7 members of her family, and as she sat in the meeting with us, 2 old women sat in the corner just praying with their beads. So it's out of respect for that we raise or single out that particular issue. The Syrian people, what's left now, a lot of the area has been retaken and is being rebuilt. And what the Syrian people want is assistance. The idea that the government and others would think that a monopoly on the atrocities rests with the Syrian government is just not factually accurate. It's an absolute fact that the US itself has been found guilty of using white phosphorus in Syria and in Iraq, depleted uranium, cluster bombs and so on. So singling out Assad as the only big bully in the world just doesn't hold traction. There's been appalling atrocities. People burnt alive in ovens by ISIS, people murdered in their beds, their houses ransacked, looted, destroyed, their children kidnapped and so on. This is not, as others have said, a Sunni and a Shia conflict. In actual fact, we met people from all religions, many of whom who've united to fight Al-Qaeda and the Saudis in this area. As one of the men said to us, a brother could be a brother in religion or a brother in humanity. And the Syrian society, which did exist, was a mosaic of different cultures. And us putting forward this motion today was really to try and have, I suppose, the maximum consensus on it. The facts are there. Sanctions don't work. The facts are there. Sanctions are tonight harming women and children. They're denying people medicine. They're denying people access to materials that they need. And they've actually served to strengthen the regime that you say you're imposing the sanctions to undermine. It's not a solution, and we would appeal, even at this late hour, for this simple motion as a positive step from a neutral, independent country to try and put forward a vision for a better world rather than the conflict and feasting on this country that is taking place from all sides.